Hey, what's up, Twisted people? It's your girl here, Chauncey K. Robinson, aka Twisted Woman CKR. And I am riding solo. If you're used to, if you've come to a lot of my other lives, usually I try to do it with family and close friends and stuff like that, mainly family, actually. When it comes to kind of going through, because I always like bouncing off, but other ideas. But today I am doing American Horror Stories, episode 4 in the first season of this spin-off series of American Horror Story, which is actually coming out. The American Horror Story season 10 is coming out at the end, towards the end of this month, and I'm really excited about that too. And I'll probably have a guest for that one because I will be trying to do live breakdowns of that one as well. But since it's a little bit of a smaller show, a little bit of the anthology, I figured why not roll solo. As you can see, my cats are wondering why I'm rolling solo because one of my cats is here. The other one y'all don't normally see, Elliot, was also here, and then Pato's down there, the ones y'all normally see. But once again, thank you to all of you who are joining us in the live chat and all of you who are joining us in the replay, joining me in the replay. It's always appreciated. I always love talking storytelling and things like that. And I figured because I do occasionally go into the Ryan Murphy world of writing, for better or worse, I was interested in American Horror Stories, so I wanted to, tackle this season. And I love horror, and y'all know that. For those of you who are here, hey Ray, thanks for joining. Ray was in the community section, and if you all want to keep up with some of the stuff upcoming on the channel and just kind of engage with me, that's mainly the place where I'm at, which is the community tab of my channel here. And Ray was one of the people who was all about the bro house, which is a reference to this particular episode of American Horror Story. So, American Horror Stories. I'm going to keep going back and forth on that. So basically what we got this episode was the naughty list. And what I want to do in this breakdown, in this live breakdown and review of this, is kind of talk about my overall grade of the episode and why that is briefly. Then kind of what happened this episode and some of the highlights, some of the lowlights of the episodes, particularly this episode. And then some of the more fun things, such as what was the best kill, the scare factor of this episode, and just kind of what y'all thoughts are in the live chat and also in the replay. And so basically, the naughty list is the fourth, was actually technically the third installment, if we're being honest, right? The first 2 episodes of this season was a 2-parter. The first 2 episodes was the Rubber Woman Part 1 and Part 2. And I'm going to be honest with you, I am so glad that the episodes got better, because Rubber Woman 1 and 2 was Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk, who's usually his main writing partner, along with Ian. They all 3 of them did Glee. So they kind of write together with different stuff and whatnot. But what we got in Rubber Woman was Ryan Murphy being his most Ryan Murphy-ness with Rubber Woman 1 and 2, for better and worse. And the thing about Ryan Murphy's writing at times is that it leans more into the absurdity than the horror of things in terms of building tension and suspense. It kind of tends to devolve into absurdity at times. And that could be great depending on the storyline. For Rubber Woman 1 and 2, I was not feeling it. I know I'm starting these lives with episode 4 because I figured let's just keep it moving ahead. But I did not care for Rubber Woman 1 and 2. Ryan Murphy was doing what he normally does, which is sometimes creating main characters who are so unlikable, yet he's telling you in his storytelling that you should be rooting for them. And he was doing that with that main woman character, the young girl that he had. And I just couldn't really get into it. So when episode 2 came along, episode 3, story 2, episode 3 came along, Drive-In, it did get exponentially better, especially because in Rubber Woman 1 and 2, all the people that died gruesomely, for the most part, the majority of the people that died gruesomely in Rubber Woman 1 and 2 were people of color. And that was just crazy to me. I was like, holy crap, way to lean into all the stereotypes. And so I'm putting this as a precursor to kind of say what my mind and framework is and going into the naughty list, because I came from lowering my expectations with Rubber Woman 1 and 2 to then kind of having slightly higher expectation. Drive-In was a little bit better. It leaned on the fear a little bit more, but Rubber Woman 1 and 2 was not, it just wasn't good, y'all. It just wasn't. And I was just like, whoa, am I going to be doing this season? Because I was like, I don't know about that. If that's what I'm going to be in store for, I don't want it. But Drive-In kind of redeemed itself. Hey, Dak, hey, thanks for joining us, Taylor. This show was a mess, in my opinion. No, do you think it's a mess? Okay. You actually agree with me when it comes to, I'm not going to go as far as to say Rubber Woman was garbage. I'm going to say that it had some strong suits, but they quickly devolved in episode by the second part of it. And the way they could have went with it, they went a totally different direction, doing what Ryan Murphy normally does, which is leaning more into the characters that just aren't likable, and then making us think that we need to keep with them, which is what he does, which is why, as someone who went through the Glee wars, I call them the Glee fandom wars. I'm used to that with him. But there are moments when it gets a little bit better. Ray is already putting in his vote for the best kill, because that's what we're going to be talking about with the naughty list. What do you think was the best kill in the naughty list? Let me know. Comment in the replay section, the comment section, or let me know if you're in the live chat. Let me know what you think. Ray is saying best kill was Trouty Mouth. I'm guessing by Trouty Mouth you are meaning Wyatt, right? He has a very distinct mouth. So like I can get that. He's a handsome guy though, in like such a picturesque, artsy, weird kind of way. And yes, I agree, Ray. Rubber Woman should have ended in part 1. I don't know why they felt like it needed to be a part 2. Part of me feels like they did a part 2 because it was a Ryan Murphy written episode. But in fact, I feel like it did more harm than good to give people a sense of what this show is about, which seems to be about highlighting other people, other writers, because Drive-In was a very different vibe. Drive-In, although it was also self-congratulating in terms of its horror jargon. And I say that as a horror nerd. Some of the things they were talking about that was very unrealistic to me in terms of the way young people talk. Like, I don't know. It just seemed a little weird to me. Maybe because I'm an older millennial, that I just don't think some 16-year-olds talk like that. I could be wrong. But in Drive-In definitely leaned more on the action horror, zombie maybe sort of vibe, and then it threw in some film bro talk, which was fine. I think the naughty list is by far, I will say, and getting to my grade of it, I'm going to give it a B, a solid B, maybe even a B plus. But I talk about my previous thoughts of the other episodes because my bar is low with this show so far, because episode 1 and 2 was just not very good. And then episode 3, Drive-In, was slightly better, maybe like a C. I felt like it ended a little abruptly, but it was better. And so when it comes to episode 4, the naughty list, I just think everything came together in a way you want a horror story to come together. And that's why I give it a solid B. There were a few things here and there I didn't care for, but for the most part, it all gelled really well. And so I was excited about that. Ray is saying episode 3 could be a whole series that I would be for. That should have been a two-parter, much like the recent Netflix zombie movie in Las Vegas. Yeah, we could have saw the ramifications of Drive-In. I think that's why I felt like it ended too quickly. And I even said when it ended and there wasn't a part 2, I'm like, Drive-In should have been the part 2, the two-parter show, not Rubber Woman. Rubber Woman didn't need a two-parter. Drive-In needed a two-parter to show the aftermath of Rabbit going on Netflix, which was a great twist. Although I kind of saw the twist coming towards the end, it was definitely a better twist. Dak is the Chuck Taylor. I wanted to call, I was calling you Dak, the Chuck Taylor saying episode 3 was better, but some of those characters were too much for me, especially that on one scene in the car. LOL, I was not prepared for that scene at all. Yeah, the funny thing is, when it came to the drive-in with that infamous scene of a certain character biting something off of another character, I kind of saw that coming. Because one, I've seen it before. I mean, if you watch enough horror movies, it's not in the most like, old school classic ones, but some of the recent ones that want to be a little bit more edgy, you kind of saw it. And that's the thing about Ryan Murphy projects. They tend to be edgelord. You know what I mean when I say edgelord, like stuff that sometimes they push the envelope just for the sake of pushing the envelope. And that's exactly how I felt Rubber Woman 1 and 2 was, where it wasn't really trying to say anything. It wasn't trying to convey anything. It was just being edgy and kinky, kind of kink shaming, if I'm honest with you. I think Rubber Woman 1 and 2 kind of kink shamed in there, but that's what Ryan Murphy also does when it comes to certain topics, when it comes to sex and things like that. That it was being edgy without actually having a point of being edgy. And that's when, in getting to episode 4, the naughty list, I think rectified that. I felt like there was a message in this episode. Let me know, y'all, the grade that y'all gave it. But I honestly won so far, although we haven't had a lot of stories. I do think it was the best story. I do think it's the best episode of the season so far. Now, mind you, we've only had 3 stories, but I definitely think this was the best one so far. And I hope that, since this seems to be a pattern so far, that the first 2 episodes were crap, in my opinion. The second story was slightly better. This third story is even better than the second one. That maybe our 5th episode will continue to rise. I gave it an 8 out of 10. I gave it a solid B for a number of reasons. One of those being that I felt like this episode actually had something to say. And in my opinion, and maybe y'all can agree or disagree, let me know in the comments, I think horror is the best when it doesn't have to beat you over the head with it, for lack of a better term, in horror, but when it actually uses horror to convey something, not necessarily social commentary, but to kind of talk on something. Because to me, one of the reasons why I love horror is because I think it's a reflection, a warped mirror reflection of our society, whether it be from something that's small and insignificant to something major. And I thought this one definitely had something to say, albeit it was a bit extreme, a little over the top at times, where the characters weren't exactly believable. But because we only had but so much time with them, I think it made its point. And that point being the question of influencer culture, of YouTube, as she talks on YouTube, but of influencer culture and how ridiculous it has become. I think in the 80s, you had horror movies that kind of 80s and 90s had horror movies that made fun of celebritydom, right? Of people just believing whatever celebrity said and celebrities doing whatever they could for fame and fortune. And I think what we're seeing now in Hollywood is more stories of people talking about the influencer culture, people doing anything for likes, whether it's TikTok and things like that, people doing anything for followers, to the point where they just want that dopamine high of being considered important. And I think this episode of the Bro House, the Naughty List, did that in a very cool way. It did it with a Christmas episode, but it did it in a cool way. So to me, that automatically gave it more points, because unlike the previous 2 stories, I felt like it actually was grounded in something, as opposed to just being a story for story's sake. Let's see what some of y'all are saying in the chat. Ray is talking about Drive-In, episode 3. Drive-In was very Generation Z, which is good for them to have some representation. Are we the clashing generations now? LOL, millennials and Generation Z. I don't think millennials and Generation Z are clashing, but you also have to keep in consideration, Ray, of who wrote the episode, which was probably most likely an older millennial, right? And that's why I couldn't necessarily believe what some of these younger characters were saying, because I'm like, I don't see them talking like that. I think there's a certain different kind of way they go about things. And to me, it sounded like a millennial, or even maybe a boomer, writing for 16-year-olds, which kind of came off not as authentic. but I still got it. I still thought it was good. It was way better than Rubber Woman 1 and 2. Ray is saying, seeing such an unapologetic queer character out in the open, in which fluid males who were classical jock hetero trope, was refreshing, because they do happen a lot, and it's good to be open about it. That was another thing about Drive-In that I liked, that you had a character who was very much open, and you had a relationship going on that wasn't part of the like after school special. It just was, they ended tragically, but it worked. Yes, influencer culture, Ray. J-Man, thanks for joining us in the chat, J-Man. J-Man is saying, yeah, I definitely agree. The last survivor could have lived if he hadn't stopped to celebrate the 5 million subs. Exactly. And I think, this is the thing. It worked. It had a point. Was it believable? Not necessarily, but it proved the point of even the character who was the least of all of them, fame hungry, even was dazzled by the fact that even though he's about to die and all this other stuff, 5 million subs, So right, Ray is saying Ryan almost verbatim repeatedly a kill scene with Artie from Glee on the laptop looking at his subscribers with Scream Queens channel. So kind of, even though I don't think this episode was written by anyone from Scream Queens, but you might be right. Maybe they were staff or something and they got it. Ray is saying also Generation Z is very social conscious generation, very social warrior, and very social media involved, for better or worse, right? Yeah, for better or worse. Yeah. So, yeah. So anyway, I think with, Ray, I was saying Ryan did Scream Queens as well, but I don't think Ryan was the one that wrote this episode. I think it was a different writer for this episode. That's what I was trying to say. So I'm not sure if they just kind of watched Scream Queens and wrote that, or, and they're a fan or something. J-Man is saying, yeah, he was still kind of obsessed with the fame. He didn't mention that watching the man fall to his death until it was actually happening. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, y'all. Just give me a second real quick. Just putting up this fan. I'm in Los Angeles, y'all. It's hot. And I got this light on me. And I'm like, it's hot. Okay. So, all right. So let's talk about what actually happened in this episode, which I thought was there were some very cool moments. Bro House was very awesome. I definitely dug the Bro House thing, because as a YouTuber myself, I don't like to call myself a YouTuber sometimes. I like to call myself someone who's I kind of lead with being a film, TV critic, and writer first, who happens to be on YouTube for this very reason of what Bro House was putting out there, y'all, which was, hot bro summer, the idea of anything for the likes, anything for the views, kind of obsessing over how many subs you get. And it never really ends when it comes to, as someone who is a YouTuber who runs a channel, I can, even though I'm a little bit of a micro YouTuber, like specializing in horror. So I have a very specific kind of niche, and, I'm not necessarily on this channel, like trying to necessarily get in the millions. I like being micro because I do other things that connect to, like, I write and stuff like that. So this is my way of talking to people, but it very much, and this is what I mean that I love horror that connects to real tangible things, is that they touched upon a very real thing with YouTubers, which influencer culture of constantly feeling like you have to top yourself, you have to get better. And I thought it was very funny that they made the joke that they were closer to 30 than 20, which is a little bit of an exaggeration. I do not think I think we're getting better of being a society that doesn't think that people, although I do think some Generation Zers may think this, because I've seen it on Twitter, that, your life is over if you haven't done enough or haven't done a lot of stuff by the time you're 30. Which is not true, right? But it played on that. So I thought that was fun. And I really loved the opening. A lot of it was kind of putting it in perspective who the Bro House was. We had the Glee alumni there. I was wondering where, Kevin McHale from Glee was on there. He was one of my characters that I liked enough on Glee. He wasn't one of my faves, but he actually was one of the ones that I liked enough on that show. Glee has its own troubles, as we know. And the whole thing of it was, I when I was watching it, I called it YouTube. I wrote in my notes, YouTube influencer cringe goodness. We had our four boys, Zen, who was a total jerk, Wyatt from Riverdale, which is also it's a horribly written show. Wyatt from Riverdale, but he's doing bigger and better things. I don't know if he's still actively on the show. I haven't watched Riverdale since like the first few episodes of the first season, so I don't know if his character is even still on the show, but he doesn't need to be because he's already done movies and stuff and seems to be doing very well for himself outside of Riverdale. Then you have James, who may or may not be someone who is gay but doesn't want to necessarily come out about it. And then you have Barry, played by Kevin McHale. And so, what we have is these bros, oh my god, bros, who want even more. They live in a bro house and they want more and they don't think they've gotten enough. And like many YouTubers who start out and they get very big, it came to a point where it's like they don't feel like their regular stuff is enough. But this is the reality of YouTube. Most people plateau. I mean, if you watch any really big YouTuber and stuff like that, in terms of, subs, they're not, quality over quantity isn't always, quality and quantity doesn't always line up, as you may know on this platform. But bigger YouTubers, sometimes they do plateau, they reach their zenith. That's what you have, and so James is Ricky from Pose. Okay, cool. That's cool. Yeah, I didn't watch Pose, so that's very cool. And this is the thing that I do love about Ryan Murphy's projects. People like Matt Bomer was in the first two episodes, and other people who have been in Ryan Murphy stuff. I do love the fact that you can always expect a familiar face on his stuff. I actually do like that. I know some people don't like it because they feel like he overuses some of the same actors, but I actually like that because it's cool to see them be in different roles. It's a certain kind of familiarity. And so they're trying to go higher. And so what happens is they end up doing a thing where they film, and Barry is their resident filmer. He doesn't actually always appear on screen, but they basically end up filming someone commit suicide. And it was funny because I originally thought that's where the show was going to go. I originally thought that the story was going to go with like the guy they filmed like haunting them or something like that. But really it was used as a way to just kind of exemplify how depraved they had got. And then of course the video comes out. They don't listen to Barry. Things go south. They try to do homosexual, which was so hilarious. Wyatt continuously saying no homo, no was so funny. But the thing that I loved about this episode, unlike some of other Ryan Murphy stuff, is even though it got funny, it kept with the scares. I would say that the tension still landed, and that probably is because of the man himself, Mr. Machete, Danny Trejo, who was awesome as our killer Santa. And so you have Danny Trejo playing Killer Santa, which was an awesome thing to see. I love Danny Trejo. He has a really good burrito, really good burrito restaurants here in Los Angeles. He's actually like the sweetest guy ever, which is so funny that he plays the kind of rough characters that he does. He's like a vegetarian and all this other stuff. And this is where the stakes went higher. I thought the kills were awesome. I thought the kills were awesome. And I love the fact, I'm going to say that I love the fact that this episode played on folklore. And I think this was another thing that I really liked about it, because the first three didn't really play on folklore a lot. And that's another great thing about horror, is when it digs into stuff that's kind of true and plays on it. And so I really like the fact that they played on the mythos of the wild man, right? So I want to show y'all a little a thing of what the wild man, the whole folklore of the wild man. And So I'm showing that right here for those of you who are watching the picture of the wild man, which is there was a reveal of that Santa Claus may not be based off of Saint Nick or the Saint Nicholas, but more so on the wild man, which is more of a real mythos, actually, which I love that it was a real mythos. And the idea that this was a person that punished people, and it was a way more, and suddenly the episode takes a way cooler, darker, deeper turn, which I appreciated, that it didn't stay shallow with that. Ray is saying the no homo had me gagging because straight guys, LOL, just life is funny. Yeah, exactly. They have to say it so much. Dolph does protest too much if you have to say it enough, right? And Ray is saying, I thought it was going to go folklore route, but it zigged when I thought it was going to zag. I think it went kind of both, Ray. I think it did do the folklore route, but just as a short reference. I think another thing to point out when it comes to this is the fact that this was actually one of the shortest episodes so far, right? Which is also, I don't know what, it's weird because they made the worst story the longest so far with the two-parter. And then Drive-In was about 48 minutes. And that was so better. And then the best one of the season so far was also the shortest at 38 minutes. And it's like, okay, why is one of the better ones the shortest one when you could have made it a little bit longer, right? And it did play on the folklore a little bit, but only as a reference point, and probably also because it only had 38 minutes. You're not going to go too deep into it. And I love the fact that, this is the thing about folklore. And as it's being said, Ray is bringing up the Krampus route, which is very overdone. I think Krampus is great and terrifying, but I do think it's done a lot, especially when people want to go the horror route of the holiday season. So it was nice to get the idea of the wild man in there. And the thing is with the folklore, it played on the fact that folklore isn't a nice, neat bow. You have this guy who is very much about the folklore, the wild man, Danny Trejo's character, which is about giving kids goodness and saying, are you being good and stuff like that. And he does take out the boys who, honestly, if we're being honest, were jerks. And they I don't think they necessarily deserve to die the way they did, but they definitely deserve something coming to them. But at the same time, this is also a guy, the wild man, who kills people who play Santa Claus. So technically he kills innocent people too. So it's like, you can't really root for the wild man. You can only take this story in for what it's saying. And that's another thing that I liked about this episode, where it wasn't so clear cut necessarily. I think Rubber Woman 1 and 2 tried to do that. It tried to be the gray area where you kind of root for the serial killer psychopath girl, but you also know she's bad. But in a way, they didn't execute it well. And that it just came off like, no, you didn't earn the sympathy from me as a viewer. While this one, there were a lot of bad actors and you could see their viewpoints from all of them. So I really just felt like this was a solid episode. So what I want to get into now is the scare factor. This is, for better or worse. I like American Horror Story, the seasons, but I will say that a lot of times when I haven't watched all the American Horror Story seasons, but the ones I have watched, I'm not usually scared when I watch them, right? I don't think they're necessarily scary. I think they lean more on the absurd, using horror elements more than being horrifying. And so I think with this one, with Drive-In, it was kind of the same, but there were scares, but more so jump scares. What I think the Naughty List did, which was different from the previous two stories, is that it inserted more of the horror, right? The lights go out. What's going to happen? Who's going to die? Because it's the thing. We don't necessarily know if all of them were going to die. We kind of figure they all should, but they kind of threw it at us with the story that Barry, played by Kevin McHale, maybe he wouldn't die. And I actually thought he wasn't going to die. I thought he was going to get badly injured, but get to continue on because he wasn't as bad as the other three. But they killed all of them. So that kind of kept that tension there where you don't know if you don't know if all of them are going to die and things like that. So I like that element. And I thought the kills were top notch. The kills were definitely top notch. Ray is saying he is a sociopath killer. serial killer that so happened to kill some bad D-bags when he caught a window into his life. Yeah, I think that's one way of looking at it. Yeah, maybe he's deranged. I mean, I want to ask y'all in the chat and also in the replay, do y'all think he was actually the wild man? Do you think Danny Trejo's character was actually the wild man, or was he just a guy that was unhinged? You know, I kind of want to believe he was the wild man, because I think to have this kind of gray folklore that isn't necessarily totally good, totally bad, actually really does gel with mythos that, you know, we see it in Greek gods and Egyptian gods and things like that. They're not exactly always benevolent, right? So I kind of like the idea that he was maybe a sociopathic, like miniature, like magical type being, rather than just a guy that might or might not have been, you know, kind of replicating the wild man. So let me know. Ray is saying that I think he was a guy that was unhinged. Okay. But I also have to admit that when they did the article of the wild man, I got chills. I was like, now that is good storytelling, inserting old school folklore into something, and none of us saw that coming because we thought it could go Krampus, it could go unhinged Santa Claus, but now it's like, well, maybe this guy is actually, you know, the guy. Maybe he's the wild man. I think there's a lot of potential for that. So in terms of scare level, and this is out of a 1 to 10, y'all, I'm going to say the scare level for this episode was a high 5, a low 6. But once again, I put this in perspective of the previous 2 stories. Rubber Woman 1 and 2 was like a scare level of 1, maybe not even that. It was like probably 0 for me, because it leaned more on the absurd and Ryan Murphy being his Ryan Murphy-ness than actual horror, you know. And then I felt like Drive-In had a 4, but that was mainly because of the jump scares of you not knowing who was going to jump out where of the deranged people. But in terms of actual like fear factor of lights going out, how are these people going to die? The camera being placed in the refrigerator, just so much irony, but also terrifying irony. I definitely give it a 6. I definitely give it a 6. Ray Alexander is saying a 5. Yeah. Chuck Taylor is saying sounds about right when it comes to my assessment of about a 6 for the scare factor. Yeah, I thought it was better, but once again, I'm giving it more kudos because the 2 other stories weren't that strong. So we'll see. Maybe my grade might change going into the next one. So I'm not sure. Ray is actually saying Drive-In was a 6 because you didn't know who was going to survive. See, that's the thing. I kind of did know who was going to survive in Drive-In. You kind of figured it was going to go on streaming. I didn't know they were actually going to name Netflix, but you kind of figured that the couple was going to live because they had to get back around to the whole sex thing, which they made such a central part of that story of them, you know, losing their virginity to each other. So you kind of figured that was going to happen. So, okay, sure. But I do think the jump scares were definitely better than Rubber Woman 1 and 2. I give them that. It was definitely violent too. And that's another thing about this series. And let me know, y'all, if y'all agree or not. I feel like this series at times, particularly Rubber Woman 1 and 2, relies on violent death and violence in general when it can't do the horror element, because horror doesn't always have to be like that, right? Horror doesn't always have to be in your face, guts are spewing out of someone's like body, right? And I feel like Ryan Murphy's and American Horror Story in general sometimes does this. It leans a little bit more on those elements, that visceral element of real violence. Drive-In kind of played on that. It was super violent. Rubber Woman 1 and 2 was violent unnecessarily so. Drive-In was violent necessarily so because of what it had to convey. The thing I liked also about the naughty list is that if you think about it, the gore only happens in like the last 5 to 7 minutes of the episode. The majority of this episode is building up the tension of what might happen to these guys. You don't know how they're going to get it. Is it going to be the Santa? Is it going to be the family of the guy that, you know, committed suicide? Is it going to be the guy who committed suicide coming back I thought we might have been getting a thing where they all were committing suicide in different ways or something, as a curse to what they filmed or whatever. It could have went that route. And so it kept that tension up until, about the last 7 or 10 minutes when you realize, okay, this is a serial killer / perhaps the wild man going after these people. Was that the best route they could have taken? I mean, I would have been more excited about the guy who committed suicide coming back and haunting them and making them like do it in different ways, but that might have been too triggering for people in a way. But I think it was okay the way they went. So yeah, so I think, yeah. All right, y'all. So the other question I want to ask is the best kills of this episode, right? So with American Horror Stories, what I want to ask in each episode that I review and break down is if it's kills that happen, I'm going to ask you what is the best kills. And if it's just mainly fear factor, I'm going to ask you what was the scariest scene, right? So what I want to ask y'all who are watching in live chat and those of you in the replay is, what do you think was the best kill of this episode? Was it Wyatt with the neck twist, the neck snap in the garage? Was it Zen getting electrocuted in the pool? Was it Barry when it came to the fire? Or was it James with the candy cane arrows? They just thought of a lot of cool different ways they could kill these guys. And that was another thing. I thought the kills were actually quite ironic and sort of funny, and they thought about it a little bit. So let me know in the replay which one did y'all think was the best kill scene. Ray is saying naughty list was that I know what you did last summer revenge killer. In a way, I thought it had other elements, maybe even like Black Christmas type element, just with a house of bros instead of a house of, knowledgeable women. Maybe the exact opposite of what would happen. So, but it definitely has elements of that. The Chuck Taylor is saying that it was the neck twist. I definitely, I don't want to influence what anyone says. And I want to kind of give people a chance to say what they think in the comment section when they watch the replay, of y'all who are watching the replay as well. But I don't know. I'm gonna go with I do think the neck twist was the most graphic in terms of like, whoa, that just happened. But in terms of maybe the cooler one, I kind of think the candy cane one with James, just because of the way it happened. Like when the arrow goes through his head and you realize that it's candy canes. It was the most on theme death. Like Wyatt's death was brutal, but it wasn't on theme. The only thing that made Wyatt's death kind of creepy was that it was filmed and uploaded, right? Although I'm still wondering how the Wild Man got their login, which is another reason why I think the Wild Man was a magical being, because how else would he have gotten? I mean, being with the way he was, do you think he was also tech savvy, or was that magic to be able to be sitting at a computer, to be able to just upload something on people's thing? I kind of think there was a little bit of that going on, which is another reason why I thought he was magical. But I think James's one was perhaps the most like inventive and on Christmas brand that I've seen in a long time. I don't even know if I've ever seen a candy cane arrow thing with the Santa before. Usually the killer Santas I see have an axe and stuff that we see on movies and everything, and they come down a chimney or something, or they kill someone with lights, which is how Zen died, which was kind of a often done kind of kill when it comes to Christmas horror. But I don't know, I feel like the candy cane arrows were the first time. But let me know, y'all, in the chat and also on the replay, if y'all think it's the same, because I just thought that was the most clever one. Ray is saying, I didn't really have a scary scene. Why didn't they? I didn't think to use the phone. Why didn't they think to use the phone and call the cops and stay together? Why do they always separate, barricade themselves in a room and wait? Well, this is the thing, right? If characters in horror movies did everything they were supposed to do, the horror movies would probably end pretty quickly. So, that was the first. Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, maybe there's some obscure indie Christmas horror movie I haven't seen that maybe has that, but I think that was a new one for me. Ray is saying, is the house kind of set up the way with influencers? Like those guys didn't seem too tech savvy outside of Artie, out of Barry. So the house may have had tech installed for the house. Maybe. I do think, I mean, usually, well, that's not how YouTube works. You still need a login. So, yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like, I definitely think that James's death was the most smart. I think Wyatt's death was the most brutal. But in terms of being on brand, I'm going to have to give it to James and the candy cane arrow death. But yeah, overall, my thoughts on this episode was that it was a solid one. It's the best one of the season. And so far, we've only got 3 so far stories, 4 episodes, but it's definitely the best episode of the season, which is kind of funny because it's also the shortest. Right now, though, in terms of overall for this season, it's not looking too strong for me, y'all. And I want to know what y'all think. The only reason why I kind of think the naughty list was a solid B for me is because of what I was comparing it to of the other episodes. I don't know if it stood on its own, because after watching movies like Fear Street on Netflix and some other horror that's come out in the last couple of months to a year, I honestly have been expecting a little bit more. I don't know if that's because our bar has been placed higher because of movies like Fear Street, the Fear Street trilogy, and other things that we've seen, that I just think that a show that comes from another show that is touted as being so good with this genre is kind of so. I don't know, y'all. I don't know. But let me know. Maybe let me know. Do you think I'm being a little too harsh on it? Do you think it's doing everything you expected? Is this exactly what you wanted? Do you absolutely love this show so far? Or are you kind of like me, where you're kind of optimistic because each story has gotten better, but still expecting a lot more than what you're getting, especially for a show with this kind of history? So let me know. Ray is saying, don't compare them, it will let you down. I don't know. I feel like, I've seen anthology shows where it's one-off. I mean, Crypt Keeper, Tales from the Crypt. I mean, some of those seasons were amazing, and each episode is its own thing, right? Tales from the Crypt was one of the first ones to do it. Twilight Zone was the first one to kind of do that sort of thing. The Twilight Zone, and usually the seasons, not the Jordan Peele one was lacking, but my Rod Sterling one was awesome. And so I don't know, maybe, this is the first venture though. So I'm giving them the space that this is their first season, and they maybe need to find their footing when it comes to stronger, sharper stories. So see what some of y'all are saying. Ray is saying, American Horror Stories is just a complimentary show, which will probably delve more into the mythology we love from the main series and on the things we wanted to see more outside of the main storyline. Well, it's still a show on out of itself, so it should still be a show that can stand on its own, right? I mean, it shouldn't just be, oh, did you watch it? The Chuck Taylor saying, Tales from the Crypt is classic. You remember the cartoon? Oh my gosh, the cartoon version of Tales from the Crypt. I think that used to, well, for me, because I grew up in Jersey, it came on ABC 7 Saturdays. And the Crypt Keeper, and honestly, one of the episodes that always stayed with me was the one where where Death was playing basketball with another guy for his life. And I'm like, wait a minute, is this supposed to be for kids? Because that creeped me out. Mind you, I shouldn't have been watching Crypt Keeper, the regular live show one, when my age. My dad is an avid horror person. He's the one that really got me into horror. And he would watch it at night. So I'd always hear that opening scene. But when the cartoon came out, I watched it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think whoa, Death is playing sports. I was like, is this for kids? But this is what I mean. It's a franchise that stands on its own. Crypt Keeper is a classic. And I just think that if American Horror Stories wants to be seen as a classic unto itself, and not just this idea of, well, it's really just for, a spinoff from this. they got to come a little bit better with some of these stories. But I am optimistic because this one was better. So maybe it'll keep getting better as it goes, you know. Ray is saying, from the trailers, I believe we definitely getting more on the voodoo witches. That'd be cool. Yeah, if there's some stuff there, that's cool. And I want to know what y'all think in terms of, I felt like Rubber Woman 1 and 2 wasn't as new user friendly for people who were coming to American Horror Stories who hadn't maybe been very well versed in American Horror Story. And I think that's another thing that it has detracting from it a little bit. I that's why I like Drive-In and the Naughty List, because I felt like these were two things that stood on its own in the style of American Horror Story. And I feel like if they keep leaning a lot on references of American Horror Story, they may lose people who might just be coming to this because I know a lot of people who are like, I don't like sitting through a whole season of American Horror Story, but I was willing to check out this show because it's one-off episodes. And I think they may lose people if they keep being very reference heavy. Which, I mean, it may be fine for fan service, but in terms of bringing new people in, it may not work as well. The Chuck Taylor saying Rubber Woman was an expedited version of Murder House. Exactly. That's exactly what it was. And I was really just baffled as to why this was the first 2 episodes. I was like, I don't think this should be the first 2 episodes of this series, because no one who doesn't really know in depth about American Horror Story, at least the first season, is going to really feel very impacted by these first 2 episodes. They're going to feel like it can't stand on its own. And if you're having an anthology that each episode is supposed to be a standalone, it has to be able to stand alone, right? You can have a few references here and there, but it can't be where you're completely lost unless you know Murder House. So Ray is saying, I truly don't think this series isn't for new fans. I think in interviews it was meant to be AHS heavy in reference. Okay. And that you might be right. It might be something where it's like, this isn't really for people who don't know American Horror Story. This is for the fans of American Horror Story who want more stories that are American Horror Story-esque, but not exactly a full season. You may be completely right. And that's a gamble to take, because you kind of cut yourself out from getting new viewers. But it also might be something where people watch it and they're like, I should go and watch American Horror Story seasons. I mean, we got the 10th one coming up. I know when American Horror Story 1984 came out, and because I'm an 80s girl, I love it. In terms of my love for 80s, I was born in the late 80s, but pretty much when it was finishing. But I still love the 80s aesthetic. And so I was excited for it. And because I started watching American Horror Story 1984, I went back and watched Coven. And funny enough, honestly, just, telling on myself, I didn't watch Murder House. I knew what happened in Murder House because I read spoilers, but I didn't watch Murder House. So for me, although I knew the references because I read what happened, it wasn't as impactful for me because I didn't watch that season like that. So take it or leave it, right? Yeah. So yeah, y'all. So those are my overall thoughts. Ray is saying this should have came out right before AH's main story or a mid-season replacement type story. I agree. Although we do have American Horror Story season 10, which I actually am really excited about and intend on watching. And I will be doing lives on this channel for those of you who want to join us here. It's a double feature. It's called Double Feature. I think that's the name of it, or at least that's what it's referencing, because I think it's aliens and maybe mer people, which could be really cool. I loved American Horror Story 1984, so I'm excited to see what they do with this one. But so far, I'm kind of in the middle when it comes to American Horror Stories. But I did really enjoy the Naughty List. But y'all, I don't want to make this live longer than the actual episode, although I think I already did, because the actual episode was 38 minutes. But let me know if you haven't already. Please do give this live stream a like if you like this video. Feed our algorithm monster of YouTube, because oh my gosh, YouTube, like the Naughty List points out, is a monster. But it's always a great talking to you all about the stories, and thank you so much for joining. Solomon Dow, thanks for joining us. This series seems like it's made to introduce new viewers to American Horror Story. Many established American Horror Story fans are over it and waiting for double feature. You might be right. So I think, Solomon, are you saying that people are kind of already done with American Horror Stories? That they're kind of like, just give us the real show? You might be right. You might be right. I don't hate it. I do want to make it clear. I do not hate this show. I like it because I'm watching it. Clearly, I'm not hate watching it like I did with Glee after season 2. But I am kind of wondering when it's gonna get better. But it has been getting better just inch by inch. So, but remember, honestly, if we're being honest, some American Horror Story seasons, even 1984 was kind of lopsided. So maybe it's not really the kind of franchise that does well with one episode kind of stories. Maybe it does need a whole season to tell a full-fledged story. And maybe American Horror Stories is showing us that. But I want to know what y'all think. Yes, Twisted House, but hopefully not in the same way of Bro House, y'all. But thank you all so much for joining me. I'm going to be doing these weekly. Hopefully the next story will be cool. And I'm looking forward to doing American Horror Story, the new season. And if you all are watching Evil, which can be found on Paramount Plus, which is an awesomely written show. Oh my gosh, I'm in love with this show. I will be starting to do episode review and breakdowns of that show once it comes back from its mid-season 2 break. So if you want to join me for that, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because we like talking horror, sci-fi, and supernatural here. Thanks again, y'all, and keep it creepy out there, but not too creepy, but permission first before you get creepy. See you then.